coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Yeah, we just got done talking about guitars and effects pedals and the long running history of the hipster analog ethos versus the new school digital ethos, basically, which actually is kind of a weird parallel to your journey, I think, and going from agency to SaaS, basically.
Yeah. Oh, that's a real nice segue. I like that.
I try. Yeah. So I'm not usually that smooth with them, but I think there's something there. Yeah. Awesome, man. Well, we've talked before, obviously, and you have a really interesting background, for starting and selling an agency and onwards from there. So maybe a good jumping off point is just, how did you, let's start from the beginning. How did you come to form an agency? What was that experience like?
Sure. Yeah. So I wasn't really intending to start an agency when I did, but so years ago, I was in law school, and a friend of mine at the time was a freelancer, and we'd been talking for months about possibly starting a business together. He'd been doing freelance web design, and I had this familiarity with the legal market. I kind of combining these ideas realized, well, in particular, lawyers had, and this is 2011, 2012, and it's probably still the case today too, but a lot of lawyers have very bad websites, if they even have websites. And so I wanted to combine our powers, my knowledge of the legal space and his web design expertise, and we started an agency focusing specifically on law firms. He had this knowledge coming from his freelance background on how he would want to run an agency, and I had these ideas of how to better market web design services to law firms. And that's kind of the genesis of it.
Yeah, very cool. And I think, a lot of our clients are always racked with anxiety about where to niche, how to niche, when to niche and all this stuff, whether or not they should be niching. A lot of them don't want to do it. But it sounds like you were a little bit more kind of fish in water with it, and kind of started from the beginning.
It was like tough at first because my partner who was freelancing was like, all right, well, I've been taking clients in all these different verticals, and if we find a niche specifically, then we are missing out on all the other types of businesses that we could be doing projects for. But it's a trade-off, because by having a niche, you can better target your marketing messages, you can better target your sales, you can better target your workflow, and you can better productize your service and build out your services and build a business, I think, having that niche.
Yeah, that makes sense. And how did that sort of inform the growth strategy? Like, how did you go about specifically marketing to that group?
Yeah, so the core of our marketing was content marketing from the beginning. I wrote a ton of content geared towards lawyers. From starting out, I realized all right, well, so let's do bottom of funnel content about what to have in your law firm's website. And over time, we saw all right, that's not performing the best, probably because there are not as many people searching for that type of content as they are more broadly lawyers looking online for stuff that they're looking for. So one thing that kind of was a light bulb moment for me was the more I spoke to our clients and where they were when they were looking to hire us. And so when they were looking to hire a web design agency, they were starting up a firm, they were expanding their firm, they were really taking a good look at their firm as a whole and seeing what needed renovation. And in this time where they're buying a website, they were also looking at other software for managing their practice, software for or software or other services for virtual assistants or outsourcing answering and things like that. And so we focus a lot of content on that, on software for law firms, which had a lot more people searching for that than law firm web design. And we SEO'd very well for that. We created lead magnets to get people in the funnel. We created charts on comparing different apps for law firms. And then after that, we SEO'd so well, we became very well known by those software companies. We formed partnerships with them, and then we built integrations with our websites to those software platforms. And I know there's a lot in this.
No, please, yeah, that's good stuff.
But that was really key to our growth.
Yeah, with all that in mind, I'm kind of curious. This might be a meandering question, but how you think about total addressable market or TAM? So it sounds like with lawyers, it's almost like kind of it's a very large B2B market. There's obviously tons of lawyers out there that you guys can serve.
Mhm.
How much do you think that having a larger TAM, affected your ability to grow the agency and eventually sell and so on from there?
Mhm. So it's hard for me to compare to other industries just because I don't know them as well. I don't know what the addressable market is for, uh, I don't know, accountants or plumbers or things like that. But like looking at early on, we saw, okay, there are a million lawyers in the United States or something like that, and 90% of them are solos. And so each one of them is their own business and would need some sort of web presence. Um, I think the stats for like accountants, I believe, is something comparable. As far as like plumbers and other home services, I know those are good niches as well. But part of what we wanted to do was make sure that we could build a product that this audience would be interested in. I know it can be tough. Like, for example, I've heard of people who go after like restaurants specifically, or like mom and pop restaurants, and those customers don't have a great, typically don't have a high budget to spend on websites and marketing, or they're using like free website products that come along with other software tools that they're using. So for us, we were kind of like figuring out, all right, can we build this for lawyers? We actually made some mistakes along the way. I think one interesting thing was originally we were thinking we'll build a self-service product. We will build something where you could be a law firm, enter your information here, upload assets, and then choose a design, and then we would, using some software that we built, automatically create a site for you. And then you could update it and add stuff to it. And that there wasn't nearly as much interest in that, which we later learned the audience was more interested in something done for you because our clients' time is valuable, and they like the calculus. Okay, I'm billing $200 an hour. I don't have time to be tinkering with a website that I would not do nearly as good as a professional would.
Right, right. That makes a lot of sense. And kind of getting into the question of preparing the agency to be sold, whether that was intentional or not, is
Mhm.
is the classic problem of getting yourself out of the business. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on just what were some of the first things you were able to remove from your plate versus like the last kind of black belt things you were getting off your plate at the end.
Yeah. So, yeah, good question. So, trying to remove yourself from the business is key to be able to have an asset that you can sell. Um, for us, a big thing that's helpful as you're trying to think about this and building a business rather than you as you being the business. Key to that is definitely documentation and having processes, such that as you're growing and hitting certain milestones, you'll know when you can drop more people in, add more people to the team, and get them going and be able to kind of fill those roles. For a long time, we were very lean, but we had good processes in place. And so over time, like my co-founder, who was originally doing a lot of the design work, he was able to remove himself more and bring on contractors and other team members, in part because we built out that process. So having good SOPs and documentation is very helpful for that. Things like the content, I was definitely more personally involved with earlier on, and that's probably my superpower for the team was my content marketing. And that was really hard to replicate without me.
Yeah, and I think there's some really interesting things to dig into there. One is just the sort of staff breakdown. I think we see it's sort of in bad taste for people to brag about revenue, so then everybody kind of brags about headcount. They try to inflate their headcount
I
and all
know,
this
and
stuff.
I hate that though, because
Yeah,
headcount doesn't really speak to efficiency.
right,
Um,
right.
Like I
Exactly.
know people uh, who are the only full-time employee at their agency, but have an army of contractors, each with who have very specific roles and functions, and they may have 25 or 30 contractors, all with different areas of domains that they control.
Yeah,
Um,
and I'd love to hear how you approach that in terms of breakdown between, W-2s and yourself and freelancers and maybe even strategic partners, just other businesses that are helping with things, and how you kind of. I'd love to hear kind of how that evolved from day one to the last manifestation before you were able to sell. Yeah.
Sure. So the first person that so we were able to bring on contractors to assist with design as we were ramping up. That was what we found an easy role for us to do with contractors because it's pretty common for designers to be contractors, and we had good processes for that we could easily add people. The one area we realized we probably couldn't do with contractors was sales. And as we were ramping up and as we were getting more and more inbound leads and also looking to do outbound, we didn't really think there would be a good way that we could do that with contractors. Especially, and I don't know if there's anyone who has mastered this, I'd be curious to know. But for us, I knew that there'd be a training period where we'd have to ramp this salesperson up. We'd have to teach them our product. We'd have to help them understand the market and the pain points and closing sales. And there's such a ramp up to it and getting used to it and being able to make those sales and having the right incentives align from the base salary and commission, having contractors. I didn't see a way that we could do that effectively.
Yeah, I'm so glad you went there because that was going to be my next question is kind of getting yourself out of the sales seat and building up a sales team and all that stuff. And I think your experience is what I've seen too. I think maybe if we were selling like just simple widgets, you could get a contractor to do it. I think for complex marketing
Mm.
services, the actual closing role is pretty much an in-house thing. We help with getting meetings teed up and the sort of top funnel stuff, but I think the closing is pretty much in-house. So. Yeah, and I think
Yeah.
that's one of the last areas our clients are able to get off their plate is the actual closing role, and I think that it takes. So I'd love to hear your experience
Yeah.
with that. How soon were you able to get somebody to close deals, and what did that take?
So yeah, and over the years, I've hired a lot of salespeople, and I've seen some do amazingly well and succeed, and others not so much. For I'd say for hiring in the sales role, having a team member who is eager to learn and very curious and a good listener is by far I've seen like the most important thing. Someone who asks questions when you're training them, who really wants to know more about the product and also help the team overall rather than being out for themselves. Really helps contribute better, ensures that they're going to be a better salesperson, and ensure that your customer doesn't churn. I've hired salespeople in the past who weren't as interested in whatever it was we were selling, who were like, all right, I'm going to sell, I'm going to get commissions, I'm going to get paid, this is going to be great. And they would overpromise. And once they'd sell that client, the person would come on board and there would just be a complete disconnect between what they were sold and the product that we are delivering for them. And that customer would then churn. And they're like, you could see it as they're onboarding, like, all right, we can't deliver this. Why did you sell it that way? Or why did you sell it like? And so when you are looking for salespeople, find people who are very curious about your product, who want to learn from you, who want to learn what your product is, what your advantages are, and what the best customers look like, rather than just being gunning towards selling everyone and making stuff up potentially to
Yeah,
sell them.
yeah, that's the age old problem. So it
Yeah,
makes a lot of sense. And I'd love to hear like what level of support do you feel was necessary for the salespeople? Like what were they responsible for versus what were you giving them? That makes sense.
sure. Yeah. So early, I think we kind of phased it in. So first we'd start with the salesperson shadowing calls, and they would like make them take notes. They'd ask questions. They'd ask, like, people would ask good questions like, all right, so I see that you took this approach with this call. Why did you do that? Or tell me more about this client. One thing I tried to create was a sales Bible with different personas, so that our new salespeople could understand what our best clients were like, and what the types of people that you typically see on sales call. And after you've done sales enough, I'm sure in your agency, you recognize there are types of people, and like generally profiles. Like, so like, for example, we'd sometimes encounter older lawyers who were curious about building a website, but didn't really know if that they needed it, but were encouraged by a family member to get a website, versus a lawyer who was maybe fresh out of law school, or fresh out of a firm, ready to start their own firm, and really single-minded toward building a firm with a web presence that could help them get more business. And so having a sales Bible to help your team understand what kind of customers you have, and also have a breakdown of what you'd want for a sales meeting conversation flow to take place. So for example, like your introduction, the questions that you ask, the direction that you go in from there, kind of like those trees, like that big decision tree of, all right, if they say this, go here, and how to end the pitch, how to follow up, and all of that having laid out.
Yeah, that makes sense. It sounds like there was a lot of, useful hand holding for them and everything in the early stages. Digging deeper into that, was it a situation where you were basically giving them a lead to work, or were they sort of full on, hunters doing everything like full stack?
Yeah, so I think we like kind of phased it in. So like actually, I do remember kind of like, first what we did is, first we had them shadow us and ask questions. Then we would do mock calls, and I would take notes. I would pretend to be one of these personas, and have them go through a sales meeting. I'd have them also typically live in our CRM and see what I was doing with the existing leads that I had to get them through the pipeline. And then I would just give them some leads. I would know that some of those leads that maybe I could close, that they weren't going to close, but that's part of the investment that you're making in the salespeople, and you have to be prepared for that. And yeah, if you're like, I know you might be reluctant, like, oh, I really could close this lead, and that'd be an extra couple $1,000. But that's an investment that you're making in your sales team.
Yeah, and I think that's the hardest, most costly thing about hiring, training salespeople. Even if they're amazing, they still got to blow up some deals to learn. So with that in mind, like, what was that feedback loop like? Like, how did you decide, if somebody was worth keeping versus if you needed to move on to someone else?
Yeah, so for I guess for knowing whether someone was a good fit or not, we were, I think, thinking within X months, like within 3 months or so, here's where they should be. Giving them that, I think, that 3 months to really ramp up, and we want to see progress over that time, to the point where we're like, okay, they're getting it, they're taking more leads. They may not be closing like a quota that we have by this point, but they're on track, and we could see them meeting this quota that we have, that's not arbitrarily set, that is realistic where they would be. And so we kind of have goals and milestones over time, and hopefully have our people meeting those. And if they don't, then it's probably not a good fit. The hard part, I'll say with hiring salespeople is, more than anything else, is salespeople are very good interviewers. Because if you're a decent salesperson, you would be, because you're very personable, and you can sell yourself, hopefully. And as far as like roles, I've hired a few salespeople that didn't work out, that sold themselves very well, but weren't as adaptive to learning our processes and selling our product like we know that we needed to.
Right, right. And were there any sort of like training wheels, tests that you were able to develop before kind of burning leads on people or investing more in them, or is there kind of no way around that?
So before we would give someone a lead, we would do basically a mock call, mock sales meeting call, where they would basically pitch us, and if it would go okay, then we would start giving them some sales leads. We would also, in the early days, on occasion, we had a couple of friends call in as their inbound leads, who were doing us a real good favor, and we'd have them answer the phone and handle them.
Cool.
And
That makes a lot of sense.
and we got feedback on that.
Yeah, yeah, I bet that sounds like a fun thing to do beyond that for their friends just to mess with them. Um,
We did have one friend mess with the salesperson.
yeah.
But but yeah, overall, like it was helpful because also when you're doing a mock call with someone on your team, you're gonna act differently probably than you would if it was a completely random person that you never spoken with before.
Yeah, makes sense. Makes sense. So one thing that you mentioned was the importance of documentation and processes, and one thing that I've struggled with, and I think a lot of our clients do too, is maintaining these documents, even if things are changing all the time. Thinking about where they should be stored. There's Asana, there's project management software, there's Google Docs. There's a million different places and ways these things can be more memorialized. So I'd love to hear how you approach that problem.
Yeah, that's a really good question and something that evolved. We didn't get it right the first time, and that's fine. The thing was, even if like you're going to change the software that you're using, and we definitely changed and things evolved and our products evolved, and that's all a part of the journey. Having like written documentation somewhere and having some things that your team can be accountable to is important. And for having everything from like having metrics to knowing who is in charge of what at every single stage. So before we were hiring our first design contractors, we wrote out a guide for like how to use our tools for building sites, but also who's responsible for what at every stage, what gets done at every stage, and like also internally what is expected from team members to do in terms of like if you're using Trello, all right, uploading all the documents to the card, setting the right deadlines of X amount of days for the next stage, assigning yourself or another person on the team to the card, and then moving that card along the project pipeline. And our processes evolved over time. We migrated eventually from Trello to other project management software. But no matter what, we wanted to have a sense of ownership, and so that we could know where things were and who was responsible for them, so things didn't fall through the cracks. Because early on, that ended up being a problem that we recognized, that you could have a client where it's on them to get back to you with assets that you needed, but it is incumbent on us to check in with them regularly to try and move them further along. And having someone's role and having in their job to follow up at X interval needed to be in our workflow and in our documentation. Otherwise, it wouldn't happen. Basically, the thinking being, if you don't have a process written down and if you don't have accountability to it, it doesn't get measured and it doesn't get done.
Right, right. I think that's the foundation for everything. And this might be kind of into the weeds and tactical, but I'd love to hear your thoughts on the software. Like how did you think about the purpose of software like Trello serves versus an Asana or comparable software versus a Google Doc or PDFs or anything else?
Yeah, so we absolutely used Google Docs for our own documentation because it was easy, it was collaborative, and we were using G Suite already. As we also liked using one tool called Process Street for which was really helpful for basically having checklists for our workflows that repeat. So we could check off, okay, we got these assets from the client, like we have everything that we need, we can move on to the next stage. And so with every site that we would design, no matter the scope, there would be checklists associated with it, and we can make sure that our team members would have to check off on every single box that everything would be completed. For example, like some issues that we encountered in the past would be something like the contact form might not have a contact associated with it for notification emails. That's a big problem. But if you have in your checklist, assign the client as the notification recipient for contact form submissions, then it gets done.
Right. That makes sense.
So yeah, so that was that was like for Process Street. We also used Trello initially, but one thing that we found with Trello in particular was, while it was fine for linear projects with a beginning and an end, it wasn't as good for projects with recurring components to them, like ongoing SEO or paid search. And so we ended up later using an app called Podio, which kind of felt like a Salesforce-like platform for database, in that it was very customizable and configurable, and we made it work for us. It took us months to configure it, but it ended up being perfect for us in the end.
Cool. And I think that's a meta point, is that a lot of the stuff you're going to have to make your own, and so on. So that makes a lot of sense. So it sounds like, you guys worked really hard to, get yourself out of the equation, build the team, build processes, and essentially build an agency that would be attractive. So I'd love to hear, how you went about the acquisition. Was this something you were planning for or not? Like how did it come about?
Yeah. It wasn't anything that we were planning on, but from the beginning, we wanted to make sure that we could have an agency that could be sold. And for us from the beginning, it was, we need something that we can grow, and that would be attractive to others to buy. And so part of that ended up necessitating having good processes and workflows with documentation, having a steady stream of new incoming sales prospects via our marketing efforts, and also having some unique selling points. So for example, we had these integrations we built with other apps that people were using that really set us apart. One other thing that set us apart was in our space, it was very uncommon for people to post pricing, but we productized our services from the beginning. We had packages. You have a website with up to X amount of pages and so on. And we published our pricing. And this transparency gave us a big advantage in that, and that the leads that were coming in, they all said something to the effect of like, I trusted you more because you were very transparent and upfront. And we had seen in the marketplace that so many competitors would get you on a sales call and then size you up. And so that was a big distinguishing thing for us as well. Beyond that, so we found the niche. We nailed marketing really well. We had our processes. Another thing that we had built in was recurring revenue. And this was a big one for us. So with any project we were taking on, we wouldn't just do a website design and then hand it off. For every client we had a recurring revenue plan for them. And so that entailed, at the very least, hosting their website, providing support and ongoing maintenance. And so customers could email us a month, a year down the line and ask for edits to the sites, and we would provide that for them. And that would all be included in their retainer, basically. And so we built up a book of hundreds of clients over the years, all with recurring plans. And so having recurring revenue meant that we could have a bad month and still have this recurring revenue to help support our operations. And so that's one thing to think about if you're starting an agency or trying to grow an agency. Sometimes the concern is, I feel like I can never take a vacation because if I don't sell, then we're not making any money. And having recurring revenue really supports that. And over time, as you get more and more clients, having that recurring revenue, just you see that increase, and you're making more and more money every year because of that, and not having to be dependent on hunting and finding new sales opportunities and closing those.
Yeah, I think that's really key. I think that's going to be really helpful and interesting to people. So within that, like how did this acquisition actually play out? Like how did it go
Sure.
down? If you don't mind going into it.
So we had built out strategic partnerships with many companies in our space, whether it was as simple as like a referral arrangement, to us having like a deeper integration with the company's software. And we were exploring like white label opportunities with some of these partners for us to develop sites on their behalf for their clients. And one of these partners knew us very well over the years, from having mutual clients with us to being at trade shows and events, and knowing us from our very extensive content. And they said, white labeling is interesting to us, but would you be up for possibly being acquired? And my response was, I don't know, maybe. And so kind of from there, the process ended up being going through due diligence. Due diligence, NDAs, all that fun stuff, assessing the value of the business that we created, and for them to see like, where do we think we could, take this business further once we combine our powers.
Yeah. Very cool. And it sounds like, and just as a quick clarification, so they were initially interested in white labeling you and you kind of being the back end provider, if I understand right?
Yes, that was kind of that was our initial pitch to them was, you have all these clients in this space, and we know that, they were a legal technology provider, and we were hearing from these providers that clients were often asking them about web design because it seemed close or related. So can they do that? And that wasn't necessarily in their wheelhouse, because web design has its own processes and workflows that's different from like hosting servers. And so we thought, let's provide this for your clients, and you can make some money and not have to deal with the actual workload of it.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And it sounds like, at this point you built something that is a well-running, well-oiled machine. You got yourself out of the equation. Marketing's working really well, MRR, salespeople and so on. So if you don't mind me asking, why did you decide to sell? What factored into that decision?
Yeah, in part the offer was good, and it all made sense in terms of like what the offer was, and also like where we were thinking, my partner and I wanting to move on and start other ventures.
Yeah, so kind of a fresh start, new things. And one question I have is, like, in the context of going through this acquisition process, is there anything that you wish you knew going in?
Anything I wish I knew going in to the acquisition? So the acquisition process, and I've heard this from other people who have gone through with acquisitions, the due diligence process is very intensive. So like, for example, the people acquiring you, and if they are any M&A people involved as well, are going to want a ton of documents. So from financials to forecasting to processes to client lists and things like that. And we spent going through the due diligence process several months of nearly exclusively focusing on getting everything together for the acquisition. And so like having to create documents that we didn't have like ready to go. If you're in the idea, having the idea that you want to get acquired, due diligence is a lengthy process, and I would absolutely recommend having your documentation, your internal processes, your forecasting, cash flow, all of that ready to go.
Right. And I'm sure some of that is just kind of like basic meat and potato stuff. And then there's other stuff that's probably harder. Do you think it would have been helpful to have like consulting or some sort of outsider like Sherpaing you through that? Or was it something that you felt like you could handle yourself pretty easily?
So I guess everyone's experience will vary. I have a legal background, so I had colleagues who I could call on if I had any questions that were helpful for the process. But if you're going in cold and don't really have much experience, I would absolutely recommend having and we did hire lawyers specifically for this, because while I may be a lawyer, my expertise is not in mergers and acquisitions. And we wanted to make sure that everything was kosher and that there wasn't anything that we left out or missed or anything that could come and bite us later. So no matter what, whether you're a lawyer or not, I would absolutely recommend having a good legal team to help you navigate the process.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And yeah, I'd love to bring this to what you're up to these days at Postaga. And so basically, how did that come about? How much party kind of relaxed time did you have before jumping into the next thing?
I think so. After we were acquired, I stayed with the company for a while as part of the agreement, and I think after I left, I said I would take 2 weeks off. I took a week and a half off. I get very restless and started kind of working on the next thing. Postaga came about because my co-founder and I at our agency had been thinking, one thing that we really felt like we never like fully nailed was doing like link building outreach, like skyscraper technique or resource, basically link building blogger outreach for our clients. We couldn't find a very scalable way to do that. Traditionally, it's very labor intensive, finding relevant websites to reach out to pitch, getting them to link to your content. And there are many tools out there, each handling a separate aspect of the process. So we wanted to see like if we could just streamline that and save people a ton of time and also help agencies offer this for their clients that's scalable for the agency and cost effective and gets results, that would be a killer combination. And so that's why we built Postaga, which helps you with link building outreach, from doing research and finding relevant websites to pitch, to getting their contact information, to then sending out email sequences to them.
Cool. And with that, I guess, like what have you learned about running a SaaS company? Like what do you like about it or not like versus running an agency at this point?
Yeah. So, and I've gotten this question before from other agencies. Some are like thinking, all right, well, having a SaaS must be so much easier than an agency because you have a product and people can self sign up, and because web design and agencies tend to be very like labor intensive, from the design to having marketing reps working with your customers. And the thinking is with the SaaS, well, I have the software and people can handle it themselves. We're still pretty early stages with Postaga, and I'm still selling every client like I would at our agency. So I have my CRM. I'm trying to get as many new users on board, doing demos, doing sales calls, getting feedback from them on what they like and what they don't like and what they want to see, and working to close them like I would if we were an agency. Maybe in the future, as we grow and as we really hone our processes, it will be more self-service and it'll just magically scale, and I won't have as much interaction with our users. But for now, at the early stages in particular, it's very similar to running an agency.
Yeah, and that seems to be like the recurring blueprint I keep seeing, especially if you read like Paul Graham talking about doing things that don't scale, and the Airbnb founders literally like going to people in coffee shops and trying to get 5 people at once to sign up for Airbnb. So, it makes a lot of
absolutely
sense.
get it. And I do things like anytime we get someone new who signs up, I reach out to them personally. I find them on LinkedIn if I can, and I haven't found a way to automatically do that, but I try and connect with them, build that connection, so I can, get better feedback for our product and make it into something that they are going to be happy to use regularly.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I know you don't have a great counterfactual for this, so it might be a tough question, but I think one thing that sometimes comes across my radar are agencies that are interested in kind of developing a skunkworks SaaS business to service a similar market and kind of do what you're doing. How feasible do you think that is, just depending on where they are?
That's definitely a good question. I've seen a lot of people try to do it and try and spin off a SaaS. I don't have, I don't really have much personal experience to speak to with that. I'd say you're going to probably, if you're going to be working on this task, have a lot of divided attention, and make sure it's, because it's like starting another business, even if it is, related to the business that you have. So make sure you have your processes very well in place with your agency before jumping your focus to something else, because that is going to take a lot of your attention, and you don't want your agency to fall behind because you're focused elsewhere.
Yeah, I think that's good advice, and I think everyone's a victim of that at some point, including myself. Just different shiny objects. So it definitely hits home. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
And kind of getting towards the end of the interview, what are you working on these days? Any new projects at Postaga? Anything that's worth covering?
Yeah. So with Postaga, I'm excited about all the new kind of features and campaign types that we're creating based on the user feedback that we're getting. So as I mentioned before, with Postaga, it could help you do like outreach, to do link building for your blog posts, to helping you with PR outreach for your business, to also helping you out with cold outreach. And so recently we did this. We've been adding just more features related to different types of outreach. So things like finding podcasts to be guests on. What else did we do recently? One thing that we got a lot of requests for was, if I'm doing my research in another tool like Ahrefs or SEMrush, and I want to import that data, but like find contacts and do a campaign for that, we built an integration, a way to import that data as well. But we're constantly trying to build new campaigns that our users are asking for. So that's a lot of fun.
Yeah, and it sounds like a really high leverage tool, and we're always sort of beating the drum about getting in front of existing audiences, before or in parallel with trying to build your own audience, as opposed to just writing content that nobody ever sees. So, big believer in that. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, Andy, thanks so much for coming on. How can people get in touch with you? Where's the best places?
Oh, they want to get in touch with me? Yeah. So I'm on the internet. I'm Andy Cabasso. There are not other Andy Cabassos, I don't think. So I'm pretty easy to find, and at Andy Cabasso on Twitter, Andrew Cabasso on LinkedIn, because it sounds more professional. And you can find me on at postaga.com. That's postaga.com. And you can also find, we have a Facebook community for link building and outreach, called Grow Together SEO.
Awesome. Yeah, it's definitely pros and cons to having a weird last name, but I think I'm all for it too. So it makes it easier to be found. So appreciate it. Andy, thanks so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks, Dan. This is fun.
Yeah, of course. Take care.